for people who can be here. So at that moment, Catherine, over to you.
Great, thank you, Tim. Bear with me if there's a little bit of background noise. I think the music's stopped now, so I'll just crack on. So I'm going to be talking about Stroud District level recovery. And at the District Council, we're in the early stages of developing our recovery plan. So we're holding initial discussions on the priorities. And it's quite important to note that these plans need to be developed at the district level, but they also need to work in partnership and complement those of the LEP, the county, the local resilience forum, businesses, towns and parishes. So there's an awful lot of coordination to happen. So although work is starting on recovery plan, work also continues on response at the same time, and across the district that's been focused on providing assistance to vulnerable and shielding residents. So the new recovery plan is going to look at two different elements, the immediate actions that need to be taken to resume the services that we depend on, as well as longer term renewal. And that's the things that will need to change as a result of the crisis, taking into account the learning and improvements that can be made to better support local communities. So it's important that this recovery work takes into account the views of local residents as well. So in Stroud District Green Party, we set up a citizen survey to ask local residents how we can build back better. And that was shared with people through local newspapers and social media. A starting point for the recovery will also have to be some of the existing priorities agreed by council members, and that includes economy, market towns and rural vitality, affordable housing, an end to homelessness, community resilience and wellbeing, and our overarching commitment to be carbon neutral by 2030 across the district. So as Greens, we're discussing with the other parties whether this is the most strategic approach and thinking about this in the new context which we're now facing. So the carbon neutral commitment was supported in the survey responses that we've received so far, and a majority of people said that it was very important that we tackle the climate crisis as part of the recovery from coronavirus. And on the climate issue, survey comments suggested that there should be greater support from the district and county for parish and town level climate action and renewable energy projects, and suggested that now is the time to set a more environmentally sustainable direction for the future, if not now, when. In this evening, I'd just like to present to you some of the other findings that we've received from the survey so far, around three particular themes: around stronger community connections, around walking and cycling, and then a strong focus on the local for work and shopping. So firstly, on community connections, I think in Stroud District, like other places around the country, people have welcomed the incredible community response to the crisis. One comment to the survey, which seems to encapsulate the mood of many, said that the main positive was coming together as a community with people supporting each other. Other people noted on a personal level that they enjoyed having a slower pace of life, more time to connect with people, with the opportunity to get to know their neighbours. One person talked about a WhatsApp group where they were chatting and sharing information and helping with shopping. Other comments related to the community support that's been in place through the existing social networks and the new mutual aid groups that have sprung up in towns and villages, and they're providing support to people in difficulty. So it's quite a wide group: those who are vulnerable, under financial stress, shielding at home, or maybe suffering from mental or physical health problems. And other comments mentioned the need to continue to guarantee secure accommodation to the homeless who were housed at such short notice at the start of the crisis. And it's encouraging to hear that the government is now taking some action to do this. So the survey comments emphasised these positives of community connection, mutual aid and support for the vulnerable. And they said that these must not be lost as we return to a new state of normality. So what can the District Council do about this? I think we really need to consider how we can best support local communities and enhance and develop these local connections, because we know that communities that are more connected and resilient will be better prepared for future challenges, whether that relates to the economic downturn, future pandemics or climate impacts. The District Council's already got quite good contacts and has been working with the community mutual aid groups in each ward over the last couple of months. And where these groups wish to continue, there might be some opportunities to keep working with them, as well as the town and parish councils, representatives of local business and other groups. The second point was around walking and cycling, and with the roads so much quieter during lockdown, people have really enjoyed the opportunity to cycle safely without fear of their lives. And one person commented that they hadn't realised how accessible the town was from their home by bike. Other people said that we need more cycle routes to keep up the momentum, and that they'd like to see safe off-road greenways to connect towns and villages, which is really positive in terms of supporting active travel more generally. You might have heard there was a recent study that identified opportunities for electric bikes to reduce the need for local car journeys in rural areas, and said that that could take up to 50% of local car journeys off the road, which would be incredible. We've got really challenging geography in Stroud District as well, so having access to an e-bike could really help more people back into cycling if the roads can be made safer for cyclists. So for pedestrians and people who enjoy walking, there is a real recognised need as a result of the crisis to allocate more space on pavements and roads for social distancing in busy areas. People are reporting that are enjoying the peace and quiet that comes from less road traffic. And there are some suggestions to pedestrianise town centres to enhance the local area and promote walking. And some opportunities as well to allocate space more fairly to people walking and cycling, and also considering disabled access needs. So in terms of leisure and recreation, people commented that they've really enjoyed discovering local walks, scenery and nature in their local area that they'd never noticed before. And there were also comments around the need for greater investment in public transport to provide a viable alternative to the private car. Clearly that's a bit more challenging with social distancing at the moment. It's certainly something for the longer term. So in terms of District Council action on this, we already have a walking and cycling strategy for Stroud District, but we do need to work really closely with the County Council on this because they have overall responsibility for transport. We need to think about identifying priority routes for cyclists and walkers in the local area as well. And perhaps it's time to reconsider the local transport plan priorities again. There was a recent consultation, which many of you I'm sure responded to, on the transport plan from the County Council, which contained lots of warm words about meeting carbon reduction targets and encouraging active travel. But when it comes to assigning funds for high priority strategic projects, as they were known, it was only the motorway and A-road improvements projects that were actually fully funded, with most costing over £20 million each. So organisations such as the AA are now predicting a permanent reduction in the demand for car travel. So maybe it's time to think about this investment again and the need for road expansion, and try and direct high levels of funding to walking and cycling infrastructure projects. I have to mention there is a Greenway project in my own ward, which is aiming to connect 3 local communities, the secondary school, sports facilities, the Renishaw head office, and to connect to a new station in Charfield. And projects like that are really ones that I'd like to see supported in the future. So we recognise, of course, there are lots of other good reasons for promoting active travel, health benefits, reduction in air pollution and carbon emissions, and it has to be one of the top targets because transport is one of the highest emitting sectors in our district. Finally, just to cover the local focus, the last theme was around a real interest in the locality in terms of people's work and shopping habits. And the comments on this section covered a whole range of ideas, which was around local commerce and the shift to working from home for most of us. So people talked about the rediscovery of the importance of the local high street and local services as one of the real positives they wanted to continue after lockdown. And they also said that they'd like to see support for local business to recover and continue, noting how many businesses are facing financial difficulty, and the local high street was top priority in many of the returns. So others even mentioned the reopening and expansion of local markets, which linked to that earlier idea of pedestrianisation of town centres. People have enjoyed the greater flexibility that comes with working from home. Of course, not all jobs can be done from home and not everyone has a desk space at home. So perhaps the District Council can also look at some hot desk hubs that could help to support the local economy and reduce the need to commute. I'm sure many of you are aware the District Council is already administrating a number of government schemes of grants and business rate relief to help businesses through the pandemic. There's a business support grants fund, the retail hospitality and leisure business grant fund, and a new discretionary business fund which is going to be up and running soon. So if you want any more information around those business funds, do take a look at the District Council website under Coronavirus Business section, and there's a lot of information and you can access the portal. One final comment just to mention from the survey offered a reflection on the VE Day celebrations, and noted that we need this kind of imaginative thinking that people had back then for a better future. So that led to the creation of the welfare state, which is supporting us through this crisis, and we can also now start to imagine something new. It would be really great to hear your views on the priorities and the kind of community you'd like to see as we emerge from this crisis. So if you'd like to contribute to your thoughts after the meeting, you can complete the survey online. It's at bit.ly/Stroud Better. And we're hoping to publish the interim results very soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. And you preempted my question, which was going to be what the link is. And Martin's answered a question that was put in chat around how many responses so far, sharing that we've had 60 or so replies, I think, but the link is there to share that wider. So please think of the themes you've heard Catherine raise, form questions for the whole panel later on. But at this point, I'm going to come to Hugh Barton. Now, Hugh is a town planner, Emeritus Professor of Planning, Health and Sustainability, has co-founded the Centre for Sustainable Energy, has advised the World Health Organization's Healthy City programs, written numerous books, but also most importantly, worked on the Stroud Town Neighbourhood Plan and contributed to Stroud District and Stroud planning around our environment. So Hugh, we're bringing all that together from the global and the local. What is it we can do to build back better? You've got your 10 minutes now, and I'll wave when we're close to the 10.
Okay, thank you very much, Tim. And marvellous to see everybody, or was seeing everybody. And I don't know if I can live up to all those things I've done in the past. You know, I'm retired now, doing the gardening. But anyway, when Martin asked me to speak, he said, well, I want a bold vision, Hugh. I want something which is going to inspire people. So I cast aside in my mind my academic reserve and sort of balance and go for it instead. And if we're looking at vision, when I've run visioning exercises in the distant past, and you ask people to imagine themselves waking up in the morning, what is the first thing that they imagine themselves hearing? And 90% of people say the same thing: birdsong. I find that just amazing, because people's instinctive connection with nature becomes very important, and that's something we can always hold on to, and people have I think found that in the time of the last couple of months. And that is the interesting thing, that lockdown has given us this opportunity to listen to nature around us. And what has motivated this lockdown? It's concern with health. It's concerned with our health, but also linked to that, the health of the world as a whole and all the people in it. So we have to recognize that health is a huge motivator. It's overcome any number of obstacles, economic obstacles, political obstacles, and so on, in order to change the way we live quite dramatically, change the economy, these in a temporary way, to change the relationships between people. So our concern, our motivation for health is very strong indeed. And I think we need to learn from that as well. So if we think about what's been going on recently, air quality's improved, accidents have gone down. I guess that people's extra exercise, which they've especially been taking the last couple of weeks, is going to have a good effect on obesity and so forth. And if we look at cities across the world, particularly in Europe, I have to say, that have really taken health and well-being, quality of life into their political domain and used it as a motivator for change, it's incredible the degree to which that has been possible. So my most particular knowledge is about Freiburg in southwest Germany. Some of you may have been there. And in the 1970s, it was concerns about the health of nuclear power and also the problems of acid rain, which led to a complete revolution in their approach to their city, which was at that time much the same as a city like Reading or Bristol or Gloucester or whatever, highly car dependent. And they did it within 30 years. They transformed it. So if you can imagine a city where walking and cycling is so pleasurable that 70% of all the trips are by active travel. And there's green everywhere. The city centre is pedestrianised. Health is improving. There's no obesity that I observe when I go around there. It's a fantastic place, and it's not the only one in Europe that you can point this to. And health and well-being, quality of life were the motivations that drove that. So my first point is that if we want to radicalise and change perceptions and change the political dynamics, then as well as climate change, which is a big motivator, and biodiversity, a big motivator, putting central health, I think, can make a big shift if people really understand the degree to which that matters. And if we start thinking about, we link the micro, the health of individuals, with the macro, the health of the planet, with also the meso, if you like, the health of individual settlements, towns and cities, and look for the joined up thinking which that implies. Healthy people, healthy place, healthy planet. So that's the second point I wanted to make. So putting people at the heart of planning, here's a very quick and dirty agenda for radical change. And it's by comparison with Catherine, who's working in the reality of the world, working from where we are now and trying to move forward very creatively. I'm in the privileged position of, as it were, looking back from 2030 or 2040 and saying, what have we achieved? So in relation to travel, yes, exactly the same agenda as Catherine. And could we have redirected those huge investments in things like the air balloon improvements on the A417, or the railway, the HS2, and instead invest in new stations, new bypasses for stations so that fast trains can get through, new cycleways across the place, and new pedestrianisation in town centres. Could we do all that? And parallel with that, in parallel with it, to change the way in which we think about location of facilities. Of course, it's difficult to change existing facilities, but we are constantly planning for new ones, both commercial and institutional and residential. If we look at our current local plan and its aspirations for it to be net carbon neutral by 2030, then we have a problem, because many of the locational decisions go against the excellent policies which are there in the plan. The two things don't match up at all. We need to start rethinking totally where we place things and using a different set of criteria other than those which I have to say the government has forced upon the local authority, which are counterproductive in the extreme and will work completely against net carbon and also active travel. So that's a fundamental point. On energy, again, we have national policies which are inhibiting what we can do now. But let's look forward to a time when there's much more of a decentralized approach, as indeed they have in parts of Scandinavia, where each settlement is responsible for trying to ensure it is energy self-sufficient, using renewables and renewable sources as much as possible. And in relation to that, we need to have a retrofit program for all the existing houses and existing buildings generally. That means that they, instead of being a source of heat loss, they become a benefit, maybe even generating more energy on their roofs than they use internally. So all kinds of opportunities for shifting the energy balance. And in relation to food, the one thing which I've noticed in the last months is the degree to which we've relied less and less on the supermarkets and more on small shops, and indeed pubs, which are acting as shops. And they're getting their food from somewhere else, not from the big suppliers, but from local farms or whatever. And very pleasant and very sociable, convivial it is. So we need to maybe try and transform the way in which the local area, the town, the district works, tries to enable all the producers, local producers, to come together with all the distribution and sales opportunities, which are non-national, as it were. So we need to think very radically about almost everything, every aspect of the institutional side and the legal and the political side of the future, so that these changes can happen. And I think by putting that message of health, and this is my final point, putting my messages of health at the centre, it could, in the light of what I've experienced for the last 2 months, it could be a good new motivator for change of the physical environment and creating healthy urban and rural environments.
Fantastic. Thank you, Hugh. A really clear message there and some really strong suggestions of things we need to change. We've not had questions in the chat, but we've had lots of support, I think, for some of those messages. So Molly has faded in from the background of the rolling hills of Stroud, the virtual background there. No, that's all right. You just disappeared briefly. You were still such that the computer thought you were your background. So we're now going to come to Molly Scott-Cato, Professor of Economics and thinker on green economics. So Molly, what's your sense of how we build back better?
So I have to say, I am going to take a slightly broader scale view of this. And as you say, I'm going to take an economics-y view of it. But it does fit in very well with what Catherine and Hugh were saying. And also I've tied it to things happening in Stroud where I can. So first of all, I think it's really interesting that people are realizing that we can't go back to normal. That's becoming a generalized thing that you hear people saying a lot now. And I think that's incredibly true when we think about the economy, because the economy as normal was marred by gross inequality, which was causing ill health actually at both ends of the distribution. And it was in full-on conflict mode with our environment. And there's lots of evidence from that, of which climate change is the most obvious example. So this kind of relentless focus on growth has led us into really bad economic and environmental problems. So I think we have to resist that sort of headlong rush to get back to growth as it was before. And as Greens, obviously, we've always said that the growth dynamic is problematic in various ways. And I think we have to be very clear in saying that now. And the other thing I think is really important principle, before I get into more detail, is the fact that we have to have solidarity across the generations. I mean, there's really interesting polling on how people have responded to lockdown. And in many countries, there's more resistance to locking down amongst young people who are obviously not so much at risk compared to older people. And older people are willing to do it. Young people are sort of, why should we do this when we're not at risk? That's not the case in Britain at all. The survey I saw showed that 72% across the age group were prepared to do this to protect everybody's health. And I think that's amazing. I mean, I'm so impressed by the young people I see around here who've, you know, spent loads of time with their parents and stuff that I would have hated to do when I was 16. And they've done that for the good of us all. And I think what we owe to them in return is to resolve the issue of the climate crisis, so we're not bequeathing to them this broken planet and this broken climate. So 3 things. Firstly, carrying on that theme about growth. The projections from the Office for Budget Responsibility show that we've lost 1/3 of the economy. I mean, for an economist like me, the sort of statistics we're seeing at the moment are totally all bets off kind of statistics. Nobody's ever seen them before. And in my view, it would be a mistake then to say, oh, let's try and repair this service exactly like it was before. And anyway, that's impossible. Originally, the OBR said we'd get 27% of that back by October. Now, everybody knows that's nonsense. So in a month, their projections were completely shown to be invalid. So the point is, anything is possible now. And therefore, I think we have to be sure that we make demands that are radical enough for the situation we're in. Also, because the moderate demands will fail for various reasons I hope I explain. And if not, I can answer in questions. And so the most important thing about this third of the economy we've lost is that we make sure it's the right third. We make sure it's the third that was, you know, gambling in the city, or people flying to Amsterdam for the weekend. And we shift the emphasis of the economy towards the sectors that are consistent with a net zero carbon future. And obviously that means not bailing out aviation industry. It also means taking more of a political control over the industries that you're paying for, so that we then, as the people who are going to pay for this, have a say over what the economy looks like in the future. And so that's what I think we mean when we say build back better in terms of the economy. We build back the sectors that we need to take us into a sustainable future. And in terms of what we do in Stroud, the overwhelmingly important sector is retrofit. The biggest problem we've all got is our homes leak energy and they're heated by gas. Now, as Greens, we say net zero carbon by 2030. So in other words, in the next 10 years, all our homes have to be incredibly well insulated, and everybody's gas boiler has to be taken out and replaced with a heat pump or some sort of electric heating. That's a huge amount of work. That's a huge amount of economic growth, if you like to think about it in that way. And so to me, the emphasis and focus of what we're doing in terms of economic revival in the Stroud Valleys is got to be focused on retrofit. Now, the second point is addressing this question, how are we going to pay for this? And I think one of the things people have noticed in this lockdown is that actually there isn't a separation between economy and society. Your best defence in a crisis is actually your neighbour, and as Hugh said, your local farm, not your supermarket. And I think we have to take that more socialised view, again, coming back to what Catherine was saying, community support, you know, extend that to the economy as a whole. And that means we don't burden future generations with the cost of this public health crisis. Instead, we again, thinking about that 2/3, 1/3 thing, half of the wealth in this country is owned by 2% of the people. I think that's the right statistic. A vast, unequal distribution of wealth. So again, we can come out of this crisis as a much more equal society if we make sure that the cost of paying for it comes from the wealthy third and not from the poorer people. And there's a horrible chat going on at the moment about how the answer to this is more austerity. That cannot possibly be the case. Also, another point that may well be relevant in Stroud is that in a crisis as big as this one, assets rapidly lose value. I can see Martin Large is here. I can't see him, but I'm sure he's agreeing with me about this. So this is going to happen on a national basis. Aviation companies will go bust. They could then become publicly owned. So could the railways. Instead of just giving money to private companies, you could take an equity share and own those assets. And that will be true locally as well. I mean, obviously we want to preserve businesses we've got, but if businesses cannot continue, then it's a chance. Something we can do is to take much more ownership of our local economy for social ownership as well as public ownership by local authorities. And obviously one example of that would be a regional banking model. I mean, I know Catherine pointed out to me that Stroud has put money into the Avon Mutual regional public bank. I think in building back better, having a public bank based in our region that doesn't suck money out of our economy but actually recirculates money is going to be absolutely crucial. I hope they're making all speed with that. It's a very good proposal. And lastly, focusing in again on the local. There's a huge risk, not just in Stroud, not just in the UK, but right across the world, that people respond to the loss of value by spending less and reducing multipliers. So if everybody does that, we are heading for a global recession bigger than the 1930s, and that is a horrifying prospect. So what we should focus on when we're thinking about building back better is sectors where you have higher multipliers. In other words, money circulates more times before it leaves the economy. In fact, that's money that goes to poor people. Richer people hoard money, obviously more than poorer people who can't afford to. But it also means making sure that you have money circulating in the local economy here in Stroud. I know again that there's been work on this at Stroud District Council in terms of local wealth building. This is what people sometimes call the Preston model, although as Catherine said, it should probably be called the Stroud model because we definitely thought of it before Preston. But anyway, it's about making sure that procurement is local, making sure that you focus on access to local resources, supporting local businesses in everything you do. And finally, yeah, what are we going to do about the Green New Deal here in Stroud and District? I think when I was campaigning in the election, it seemed really clear that there was a very good opportunity for creating a local Green New Deal here in Stroud. We have the skills, we have the college, we have Berkeley Green with lots of space and lots of exciting ideas for innovation. We need to put these together in order to bring about exactly the sort of retrofit and transformation of our of our local community that I believe is possible. And this is the way to shelter ourselves from the very nasty headwinds that might be blowing around not just the national economy but the global economy. And if we can do that, then we can also provide inspirations to other local economies. If you look back to the 1930s, there were places where people completely worked against the model of austerity and saved their economies. And I would really like to think that Stroud could be such a place in these circumstances. Thank you.
Molly, thank you ever so much. Lots there, and you've stimulated some really good deep questions that I don't think are quick questions, so we'll come to those for the whole panel in a moment. But I'm really pleased we've got David with us, David Owen, CEO of the Gloucestershire Local Enterprise Partnership. So the Local Enterprise Partnership says its mission is to make Gloucestershire great by driving sustainable economic growth throughout the county, has been doing a lot on COVID response, but also looking to the future. So David, really keen to hear your thoughts too on how we're building back better.
Sure, thanks Tim, and I agree with a lot of what's been said already. COVID has been, first and foremost, a four-stage approach, effectively. So first of all, to provide the emergency support that many businesses across the county have required. So to get the information out to businesses as quickly as we possibly can to the support that's available, whether that's through the district council, through the grant funding that came down from government, or it's through some of the government schemes that have been available and the furloughing schemes in particular. And we're very fortunate that what we've got in Gloucestershire is a very strong growth hub network. Of course, unfortunately, the Stroud Growth Hub opened informally about 2 weeks before lockdown happened. But I know the team there have been working with the Growth Hub team right across the county to continue to support businesses. Second stage then is to analyse what the economic shock means for Gloucestershire, and we're by the middle of next week at the latest, we'll have a really good picture about where we think from the economic evidence the big shocks will be in Gloucestershire, both by sector and by geography in the county. Third stage then is to come up with a recovery plan, and that's work that's ongoing at the moment. So we're working with colleagues in the districts, with businesses, with our business groups, to look at what are the interventions that are needed for the economy to recover. And then finally, to build the economic resilience back into our economy. So Gloucestershire's economy historically has been very resilient. We enter into recessions later, we come out of them quicker usually. But this is a recession that we're going to have which is like no other, because I think it was Hugh that was saying this is a health-led recession. It's not an economic-led recession per se, and that creates a whole host of very different challenges. I think it's worth just reflecting on two pieces of information that we've got. One through our business surveys, which are that 44% of businesses in Gloucestershire are concerned about their future. So they're concerned that their business may not be here in 6 to 9 months' time, and that's with the support that's coming from government and from others at the moment. And of course, last week saw the release of the unemployment data for the county and for the country for April. So in April, unemployment in Gloucestershire doubled practically. It went from 2% to 3.7%. So from around about 7,500 up to just over 14,000 people unemployed in the county. And when you bear in mind that's with furlough in place, that's with the government effectively paying for about 20% of employees right across the UK. That's a really shocking statistic. And we know that when we get unemployment and we get recession, those that are the very hardest hit are the young, because they struggle to compete with those of us with more experience, and those furthest from the labour market and those furthest down the food chain, if you like, in terms of employment. So we know that we've got problems around the corner when furloughing ends, and what the impact that will be in terms of Gloucestershire's economy. So our approach in terms of recovery and what that looks like is very much in line with what the other three speakers have said. So the vast majority of the feedback we've had, whether that's from businesses, from the education partners that we work with, or from the local authority partners, is that what we can't do is go back to where we were. And there's some very practical reasons for that. So there are some parts of our economy and some businesses which simply will not be viable for as long as we're in a social distancing situation for a start, and then you question their long-term viability as businesses anyway. But also there's a real desire amongst certainly the businesses that we're speaking to, that they want to move to a different place. So a lot of what the previous speakers have been saying, whilst working from home isn't for everyone, actually a lot of people have really welcomed that opportunity for more flexibility in their lives. Whilst most people are still car owners and rely on the car, or were relying on their car 2.5 months ago, people are welcoming the fact that that the air feels cleaner, that pollution levels have gone down, that noise levels have gone down, and that we've got nature flourishing in our communities like we've never seen before. People are talking about how the damaging effect of lockdown on mental health, but also the potential for that to be a really positive thing if we put that flexibility into place in the longer term, and if a new normal becomes that people have more flexibility in terms of their employment, and employers that trust that people can work from home or work remotely and will get the job done probably more effectively than they would if they're being asked to travel into the office or the workplace on a regular basis. So I think the challenges then, how that chimes with our draft local industrial strategy, and we've reviewed our local industrial strategy over the course of the last month or 6 weeks, certainly what we were told nationally when we first published our draft local industrial strategy was that our focus on sustainability in the environment was probably one of the boldest in the country of the 38 areas that have produced local industrial strategies. And if you go through some of the priorities we talked about, then we think we're really well placed in Gloucestershire to build a different kind of future. So our biggest challenge is our demographics, and that's about the age of our population in the county, and how can we attract more young people into Gloucestershire. And it may just be that, like for many other things, that COVID, for all of its tragedy, can act as the catalyst to attract more young people out of major urban centres and into slightly less major urban centres, whether that's Gloucester or Cheltenham, where it's the Stroud Valleys or it's the Forest of Dean. So I think there's a real opportunity with the right infrastructure in place that we can start to shift that demographic challenge that we've had in Gloucestershire for a number of years now. So our key ambitions are to build a cyber-tech sector which is genuinely world-class, and that's based around GCHQ being based right in the heart of the county. And it's not surprising, is it, that actually cyber-tech and the IT industry is flourishing right now, because we're all on Zoom calls and using tech like we never have before. So what we've seen is huge growth in that sector, which puts us in a really strong position. Our second big priority was about how we do become a leader in sustainable growth nationally. So how does Gloucestershire create the greenest possible economy that we can have? So how do we put proper sustainable growth at the very heart of what we do? How do we ensure that has a strong standing in the decisions that either the LEP make or other people that invest in the county make? And how do we make sure that our businesses are changing quickly enough to address the needs of climate change and to ensure that their businesses are sustainable because they're moving in that direction? So our big infrastructure priorities were around looking at moving away from car dependency. So the scary statistic for me is that still in Gloucester, which is our biggest urban centre, over 60% of people pre-COVID were travelling to work as a single user in a car or a van, and that's in our biggest urban centre. And we need to change that dynamic if we're going to change the way in which people are operating. So our big priorities were around looking at a mass transit solution that would cover Gloucester and Cheltenham and the outlying areas, to put better cycle links into the whole county so that we can make good use of the flatter bits of the county and look at more creative solutions for the hillier parts of the county, so that I think electric bikes must provide some kind of solution for the Stroud Valleys. I live at the bottom of the Stroud Valley, so I know how difficult it is to go up it. But also to look at how we invest more in rail infrastructure and how we get more people in Gloucestershire using rail to travel around the county. And that's going to need some station reopenings. It's going to need much better services and much more frequent services as well. The other thing that we are absolutely clear about is we want to value the natural capital that we have in the county, and that's been a really tough one, because our investment decisions are led by guidance from central government because they're providing the money, and there's been a lack of recognition of the value of natural capital. When we did the LIS, we based it on a survey of over 5,000 young people, and what they said loud and clear was their biggest concern was climate change, and what they said they really valued about the county was the natural capital and the countryside. So we have an absolute responsibility to make sure the decisions that we're making as the local enterprise partnership leave our young people in an environment where we are recognising the challenges of climate change, but also we're making sure that we protect and use the natural capital in the county. And I think finally what I'd say is the big lesson for me that I hope we can stick with from the last sort of 8 to 10 weeks is it's amazing how rapidly you can make change if you really have to. So the cynical people amongst us who were working in offices and thought we could never work from home have had to do it. We've had to use technology to do that. And I think one of our board members at a board meeting said, if you look at how we've all started to embrace technology more in the last 2 months, we've probably come forward as much as we would in the next 2 to 5 years. We've seen government making really speedy decisions to make sure that businesses don't fall over immediately. And so the lesson for me is we've got to cut through some of the bureaucracy of decision making in the UK in order that we can make quick changes. And for us as the LEP, that's all about being really brave and transformational in our thinking about what recovery looks like, and making sure we don't go back to the economy that we were operating in pre-COVID, that we take the brave decisions now and we take them quickly so that we can move on to a much better economic future for the county.
David, thank you ever so much. And we've got lots and lots of comments coming in the chat and conversation. So what I'm going to do is put one of those questions to you now, David, which is just from Ad Oldman on when we're talking about businesses for the LEP's role, is that just commercial business, or to what extent does it include not-for-profits, charity and social enterprise sector in your remit?
We don't distinguish by ownership model. So, for example, our Growth Hub service will work with any business that walks through the door and give them advice. It doesn't matter whether they're a privately owned business, internationally owned business, not-for-profit, a social enterprise, or any other business. We'll work with them and support them. So we're agnostic about ownership model in that sense.
Fantastic. There were some stats questions that also went in the chat, but I won't ask those now because unless you've got on your fingertip, we won't go to those. So we've got 5 or 6 themes coming out from the questions that I'm going to take us through and call on people, hopefully. So if you put a question, try and remember it. I might call on you to unmute and share your question. But the first ones were sent in advance from Wotton, and our first theme is going to be kind of the high street and the local economy, because I think lots of people asking what we're doing there. So I think it was the Chamber of Trade in Wotton, was it, Catherine, put in some questions in advance asking what the panel think a post-lockdown high street is going to look like, and what you think some of the funding district councils have been awarded should be being used for to help the high streets. So I think that's a question for any of our panel who want to take that.
Well, I feel I should have an answer to that question, but I don't really have an answer to that question. I think it's a very difficult question to answer. And I think it's maybe a bit difficult to imagine that when you don't actually get out of your house at all and you've spent 2 months trying to make sure that people will bring stuff to your door. So I've thought for a while that what we need is kind of department stores of local suppliers so that you can get all the shopping you want in one place. And it makes it easier for people who don't have very much to sell to put it in that place. So I think we need to rethink the way we sell local food and local produce generally. I agree with the person who said it's been brilliant seeing the pubs turn into shops, and some people will know I put together a list of where you could get stuff delivered in town, and it was amazing the way community shops immediately stepped up and started offering to deliver and started selling a wider range of produce. Maybe that will continue. It's not a solution to the high street, but I think the high street was in trouble anyway because of increasing amounts of online purchasing. And I think we really have to decide what we want our high streets to be, and maybe we do want them to be places where we meet people and exchange books, and not necessarily places where we do the majority of our shopping, because I think it's hard to imagine how we're going to achieve that in terms of the competition that there is from online. So my view of the high street is we focus it on selling local produce rather than, say, trying to encourage Marks and Spencers to come into Stroud, which I just don't think that's going to happen. And I wouldn't want it to happen anyway.
Yeah, can I chip in on that? I mean, I agree exactly with what you're saying, Molly. And if we look at town centres across the country, those which are doing well are either those which have a very big hinterland and a very rich hinterland, and people are making good use of them still as retail centres. But in most cases, it's a question of the function of the centre gradually evolving, in fact, sometimes quite rapidly evolving, so that it's got much more of a social function. And the coffee shops in Stroud are almost notorious now. You can spend a whole day going round from one to another and never escape from some social contact. And then there's also recreational activity and tourist activity, which in some places could be significant. So allowing change to the centre, not imagining that it's going to be a retail heart forever. It's going to be partly retail, and I agree about the local emphasis that Molly's made. That would be very desirable, and we hope it'll happen. The other thing is, there's a question on the fringes of the town centre, the degree to which we allow them to evolve into housing. And there's planning restrictions which currently deter that. But it might be that we have to review those in the future and allow shifts to happen up and down the high streets, not necessarily in the very core where you want the concentration of footfall, but in the vicinity of the high street or the side roads and so on, that have less cachet.
Can I just add, I think Molly's absolutely right. It's really difficult to predict what the future of the high street looks like right now. And part of that is the high street is still closed fundamentally right now, and we won't really know the impact in terms of what's going to happen to the high street until it reopens or doesn't reopen, until furloughing's gone. I think we've been looking at the high street for a number of years, partly because our chair comes out of Superdry, so has some expertise in retail, considerable expertise in retail. What's really clear is the high street has been becoming a place of entertainment for a number of years now, as opposed to a place to shop. And it's about how you get that balance of entertainment and a social space in a high street, but provide enough services that people can still shop if and when they need to. And how do you marry up digital and online purchasing with the high street? How do you create an experience which still demands that people come into a place so that you still get that footfall, that activity going on, instead of sitting behind their computer screens and buying things? I think what we do have to remember is that I think the shift to So local purchasing is great. I'm an advocate of it personally, but there are lots of people in Gloucestershire for whom the only solution to getting food as they see it is to go to the pilot high sell at cheap supermarkets and buy food at the cheapest possible price. And we have to be aware that our buying habits as individuals are not the buying habits of the mass populace, and we need to be careful that we're not then excluding people from some of those basic provisions by decisions that we make.
I would make another point, if I may, and that is that the quality of the town centres is critical. Those which are successful, and I would point to Cirencester by comparison with Stroud here, though Stroud's not a failure, but it's the sense that you're in a place, that it's a place which is cared for, a place which is beautiful and historic and pedestrian and cycling friendly, so that when people eventually get there in their car or by e-bike or whatever it might be, they think this is a really nice place to be, I'm coming back. So the neighbourhood plan for Stroud Town Centre was all about trying to enhance the quality of the place for people, not for traffic. And another aspect of it, of course, was to increase the population in the immediate vicinity, the easy walking distance of the town centre. And you can do that when you have vacant sites lying around for decades, if not millennia, or across the millennia, let's say. It is something which we should be really concerned about, to make sure that the population within a striking distance of the town centre is not merely maintained but increased.
I think there's some really key points coming up here, and thank you, David, as well, for picking up on that equalities point, which is something a number of people have mentioned in the chat of how do we make sure we're providing affordable retail for people as well as.
Can I come in on that point?
Please do,
because it's a point that's often made by the big food industry and the supermarkets, that it's, you know, middle class rich people that value local food. And it's really important that we recognise, especially now, because of that thing I said about the multipliers, it's really important that we recognise that if we're spending money on local produce, then that is keeping that money in the economy. That ultimately creates jobs for us and benefits us. We have to think of ourselves as on the producer side and not just the consumer side. This economy that drives us always to demand lower prices is actually what's also at the other end of the thing, destroying our jobs. So I think we need to think really carefully before we make that argument. Sometimes, you know, we feel embarrassed because we have more money than other people. I feel embarrassed about that. But the answer to that is to resolve inequalities in society, as I discussed earlier, not to buy into the supermarket model that the right thing is to have more cheap food. Cheap food has been very destructive, obviously, to farmers, to public health, but also in terms of not enabling the sort of strong local economies that ultimately create better jobs for all of us.
So I'm going to come at that point to a question from Gareth Kitchen. So Gareth, I don't know if you can unmute, because this gets us to the question of how we're measuring that growth. So Gareth, over to you. Have we got you? You're still muted, Gareth. Oh, he's got no mic. Okay, I will pose his question then. So he was saying previously the local enterprise strategies you've been talking about growing the economy by 4.8% per year by 2020. Obviously, COVID presents some challenges to that, but how are we measuring that growth? And maybe to link that question to one from Chloe Turner about how do we prioritise businesses which are contributing to our natural capital rather than damaging it. So how do we measure our progress towards building back better, essentially is the question here for the panel.
Shall I go first? I think I wouldn't measure it how we've previously measured it. So the 4.8% figure would be a measurement we would get from Office of National Statistics on the total value of the Gloucestershire economy. And that's data that's provided right across the country. I think, how do we prioritise supporting those businesses that are doing the things that we want them to do? Well, our model for Growth Hub 2.0 will be doing exactly that. It will focus on the specialist advice and guidance that businesses that are aligned to the priorities in the local industrial strategy are delivering for. So it's about how we provide the support, how we put in the right conditions to enable those businesses to flourish here. but also really importantly, how we sell Gloucestershire as a place that wants those businesses in the county, and how we sell Stroud District as a place which wants those businesses in the county. Because we also need people to move in from elsewhere to come and grow their businesses here. And I think there's some relatively easy things we can do, but they're not without controversy. So the investment that we made in the green site down at Berkeley, run by South Gloucester Stroud College at the time, and still now, there are some people who doubt the validity of that site, but actually that site is fast becoming a real centre for next generation future thinking businesses, and we need to do far more of that kind of brave investment decision that looks risky on paper at the time, but actually with the right people leading it, and certainly Kevin Hamblin of SGS is a force to be reckoned with, you can make good things happen. And that's what we need to keep doing, is underpinning the kind of projects that we would support to attract those kind of businesses in Gloucestershire.
I agree about Berkeley Green. I think that's what I call it. Maybe that's not the right thing to call it, but I think, you know, there's a lot of promise there. It could go further. I think it's always difficult when you're struggling with a government that essentially works against what you're trying to achieve locally. Otherwise, it's exactly the sort of thing that should be receiving regional development support. But anyway, in terms of how do we measure the economy, clearly as Greens, we would like to see well-being prioritised as a measure, various aspects of well-being, rather than kind of the cash counting approach of GDP. I imagine that 4.8 figure is actually GBA, isn't it? Not GDP. That's what I think.
Yes, yeah, it is GBA.
Yeah. Because if we think about well-being, I mean, there was a lot of panic about, oh, everybody must get back to work because their mental health is under threat from being at home. I haven't seen actual data for that, but I do hear a lot of people saying that actually they're much calmer and happier and they enjoy spending time with their family. And, you know, there could be ways in which being less economically active, even, dare I say it, doing less shopping, could add to well-being. For example, if you worked a 4-day week, you know, you would have more time to spend with your family. You would be able to do things around your house, so you wouldn't need the money to pay for other people to do them. So, yeah, again, I think we need to be a little bit careful about what it is, what's our target here. And obviously some economic activity actively undermines well-being. For example, having a betting shop in your town, you know, loads of people I'm sure are getting too addicted to gambling right now. It fills me with horror. But, you know, there are certainly things you could put in the high street that would make people's lives worse. And when you have a really significant disaster, you're adding to economic growth. So if you look at the growth figures right now, obviously there's a big increase in economic activity in health and social care professions because a lot of people are ill. So yeah, anyway, it's quite complicated, isn't it? What you measure and what you should measure. But I do think it's important to have a lot of ancillary measures that show you the complexity of what's actually making people's lives better here and making the natural world's life better as well, and not just focus on economic output.
I do wonder. Sorry, I'll go on.
We go to Catherine next, and then
yeah, just very briefly, I think we should also be talking to businesses about how they feel, how well their businesses are managing in their locality, in the market towns particularly. We need to be building stronger partnerships with chambers of trade, business associations, and when we were talking about, you know, the leisure economy and meeting up on potentially pedestrianised town centres for activities and coffee, I would be really sad if we lost bakers and butchers and veg shops. And there are large numbers of people who have social interaction on the high street as well. And I think the economy that we're looking to measure is about continuing to have a range of services, continuing to have a high street that's alive, and maintaining those social spaces. So festivals and, you know, organising events to bring people in is part of it, but I think we also need to be having a balance across every community. So I think a partnership is important, and also in determining how we spend funding, we need to look for businesses for guidance on that too.
So just for time, I'm going to collect a couple more questions and then let the panel pick which ones they want to reply to. So 2 more on the economy theme, and given hopefully we're able to run for another 15 minutes or so before we wrap. So Thomas Miller, you had a question around one approach to the local economy. So can I get you to pose that?
Yeah, I think we've got a fantastic history in Stroud of making and of kind of innovation as well, and also fantastic resource of kind of digital skills. So I was wondering about the kind of idea of Stroud specifically, but Gloucestershire more generally, becoming a kind of digital making hub as a way of kind of engaging, engaging in the future, and obviously kind of doing that in a kind perhaps using regenerative design principles and things.
Fantastic, Thomas. So a digital making vision of the future there. We also had a question from Phil Blomberg around Brexit. I don't know, Phil, if you're able to unmute and pose that.
Yeah, no one's mentioned it so far, but I think it's important. You know, the unresolved scenario that's looming, that being a no deal, is hardly going to help. I'm sure that it's the case that it's been in the backs of the minds of all the speakers, but would any of them particularly like to comment, maybe in regards to the upcoming deadline for asking for an extension? Thank you.
Great. So we'll come to the panel. You can pick which or both of the questions you want to take. Maybe Hugh, we can come to you first, and then David, Catherine, and Wally.
I'm not sure I'm very qualified to answer either of those. My digital skills are, this is as far as I go. But on Brexit, yes, I agree with Phil that we haven't factored in the impact of no deal, which could be disastrous. I mean, we're in a situation, as we've been exploring, of unemployment and risking many businesses going bankrupt and the rest of it. If we then find we can't trade easily with Europe, it's going to be very difficult indeed. But I haven't really any detailed knowledge.
Catherine or David?
Yeah, I would agree with that on Brexit. I think there is a real challenge, and I'm probably on record somewhere saying I'm a committed Remainer, but that went well, didn't it? I think, just if I answer the first question, yes, absolutely. There is a real opportunity for Gloucestershire to be a centre for digital creativity. So if you look at the level of innovation in the UK, the average is around 55% of businesses are engaged in innovation activity. And in Gloucestershire, that's just over 70%. We've got this rich history of innovation, whether it's Edward Jenner or Edwin Budding, or it's the work of people like Snow Business or Renish or whoever it might be, or probably shouldn't say this one, but the jet engine. Yeah, we are the home of the jet engine. So we've got this really rich tapestry of innovation in Gloucestershire, and we've got to capitalise on that. Our opportunity is that we've got GCHQ here, which gives us a huge advantage internationally, because lots of people want to be here, want to be in the proximity of GCHQ, not because they're involved in the sorts of things that we see in spy movies, but because they're involved in the digital world. And the biggest threat, if you listen to what Jeremy Fleming, the head person at GCHQ, says, is the digital threat that we currently have. So that's why our focus is on cybertech. And cybertech has to include digital creativity as well, and that's what people like GCHQ want, is that creativity. The big challenge there is we've got to have really good broadband connectivity everywhere. We've got to have that right across the county, and so we've got to keep pushing for better internet connectivity to everyone. The one other thing I would say is, I think we have to remember that businesses are people. Businesses aren't some big, large, amorphous things which just exist in their own right. Actually, if you look at the stats for Gloucestershire, 85% of people working here live in the county. They care about the county. Their children and grandchildren are at school here. They're socialising here. So they have a passion for being here. People choose to come and live here. They're not generally forced to come and live here, and so businesses are just groups of people. They're not, in most cases in Gloucestershire, they're not big amorphous beasts who do things without people being at the very forefront of that.
Can I just come in on the Brexit question? I feel it's inevitable that I do that. I think Phil is completely right. After the end of June, we are locked into leaving at the end of December, even if we don't have a deal. That's the arrangement. And the government is saying it won't ask for an extension, even though both the main negotiators had COVID-19, so nothing happened for about 6 weeks. But still, let's get Brexit done. Yeah, and obviously the other side of that is that the idea of global Britain and businessmen jetting off to Wuhan to sell their whatever it is has also bitten the dust. So, well, obviously to all of us, well, maybe not all of us, but most of us, it never seemed like a good idea, but it seems like a much worse idea right now. There's a lot of pressure through lobbying to get the extension, to get the government to call for an extension, but I mean, it's worth putting effort into that, but I think it's more likely that they will use their same sort of chicken game that they used last time, which actually worked for them last time, but my European friends say won't work for them this time. I hope they're right in the sense that it will protect the EU, but it will be really tough for businesses in this country because it means a lot of the kind of frameworks through which they trade will simply not be available after December. And we have to rely on this government in the middle of a pandemic to sort out other frameworks and structures. And I don't think they're up to that myself. Just quickly on online shopping, somebody said that online shopping was, you know, we shouldn't be encouraging it. I hope I wasn't encouraging it. I agree. You know, the thing is with online shopping, the costs are hidden. They're still there. They're just hidden, aren't they? You know, the cost of somebody driving to your house specifically, probably with not very much in the van, and all the packaging and the really awful contracts that people have. And so, you know, when we buy something ourselves, we're looking at that thing and the price. But there's a massive hinterland of a global production system with a lot of injustice and a lot of environmental impacts to consider as well.
Catherine, did you have any things you want to add?
Those are the most difficult questions, really.
Okay.
It's great to hear that, you know, Gloucestershire is very strong, certainly in those developments, and I'm also very concerned about Brexit. You know, the whole range of different industries and agriculture which could potentially be really badly affected by a no-deal Brexit, and it would just undermine all the effort that we're thinking about in terms of supporting the local economy if this, a few months down the line, we're then facing a no-deal Brexit. Thank you.
So there have been lots of questions on the theme of transport, but I think I'm going to maybe come, if Phil Booth is still connected. I think Phil had a question that really brought together building back better for our whole community. I don't know, Philip, if you're able to unmute that question.
Hi there. Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Great. Video coming? Great.
Yeah, I can see you.
Yo. Yeah, no, my question was about learning from what's happened. It feels like this is almost like a taster of what's going to come along with climate change in a few years' time, or even sooner than that. And what can we learn from our communities and the resilience that some of them have shown? What can we learn and build on in the future, really? So you've seen, you know, some communities really being great and, you know, coming together, and other communities really, I mean, really challenging times for some individuals. I work on a grants hotline, and some of the people there are having, you know, absolutely, you know, the hardest times you can possibly imagine. So I don't want to, basically it's about not missing out on learning from where what's been going on. How can we learn from it, and how can we take it forward and build even stronger, more resilient communities?
Maybe I can ask the panel, what's the learning you're taking away from this? What's the kind of spark you're seeing that says that's something we can build on?
I think it's really important that we do remember what Philip says, that a lot of people are not supported in any way at all. You may have seen, well, no, probably only me watching the Prime Minister in that appalling session earlier on where he showed how little he understands about what's going on. But yeah, he did indicate that he didn't know that migrants, I mean, asylum seekers, for example, don't have access to any funds at all. So it was quite shocking that our Prime Minister doesn't know that. But obviously there's lots of people in our community now who have been left out of the various schemes and actually have nothing at all. And I think the most important thing we're learning is that we were not a resilient society, that 10 years of austerity has really made us a very fragile society in economic terms, But at the same time, socially and in community terms, I think most people have been astonished by how strong our communities are. I mean, we live in Stroud, so perhaps it's not such a surprise, but my son lives in Stratford, which has the highest rate of COVID deaths anywhere in the country and is incredibly multicultural and diverse. And the sticking to the rules there and the looking out for each other, it was extraordinary. There really is no communities. People are in and out all the time. Most people have not lived there more than a couple of years, but yeah, it was, I mean, there was also a lot of drug dealing and not so pleasant things, but it was very impressive how people really not realised that it was only solidarity was going to get us through this. And I think that's so true of climate change. And to me, that's a very important lesson. I think David already pointed out that we've learned that we can change extremely fast. I actually, as some people know, came back from Brazil on a cargo ship. And so when people say, you know, it's like turning around a super tanker, I know that a super tanker can turn around in its own length because I was on one that did that. And we've just proved that we can do that as a society as well. And also government is very powerful and can find money when it needs to. So we can do that with climate change as well. This is the thing I'm writing elsewhere, which I hope I'll publish soon, making exactly these points. You know, we can't let them get away with saying we can't act on climate change because we've just seen how rapidly we can act and change things and how we can find the money when we think it's really important. And nothing is more important than sorting climate change.
Yeah, thank you.
I absolutely agree. I think that is the key lesson, is that if we really want to change things and do things differently, we absolutely can. It's how we create the burning platform that is strong enough for people. And clearly with COVID, we had a really strong burning platform and really strong messaging that we should all stay at home. We shouldn't go into our places of work. So I think it's how we make sure that we don't lose that and we don't fall back into the rut that we were in. I think the lesson learned from me has been about community. I happen to live on a road which had a very strong community in any case, and it's got stronger and stronger. I now have to mute the 2 WhatsApp groups during the day because they ping away all day long, and then I review all the messages in the evening in order that I can get some work done. I think it's also about understanding the unintended consequences of actions. So I happen to be chair of the Summerfield Charitable Trust, and what we've seen from a lot of the charities that we work with in Gloucestershire are that those that listen to the messaging about diversify your income streams, don't be reliant on grant making, are the ones that have been hit the hardest, because all of a sudden those diversified income streams disappeared like they did for lots of businesses. So whether it was charging car parking or running cafes or operating shops or diversifying in other ways, those charities were really hard hit. And I think it's just about thinking about through what the consequences are of the decisions that we make, either in organisations or that governments make or that local government makes, that may have an impact further down the stream that we haven't foreseen. And we just need to think through some of those issues in a more strategic way.
Great.
Well, I echo all that, but very, very briefly, what's really impressed me is the degree to which our general image of society, driven by what government does, what the papers say, the media and so on, of the me society, you know, everyone just working for themselves and irrespective of other people, they're just pursuing their own interests. That's been completely undermined by what's been happening in the last 2.5 months. And the degree of caring, the degree of care that people are taking for each other, whether it's shopping for the older people across the road or whatever it might be, whether it's coming together on a Thursday evening in our case, we do some singing as well as clapping and so on. There's a mutuality of society, locally at least, which is very moving and impressive. So how do we keep that?
Yeah. I'd add to that. I'd just say from my own side in Wotton, we've also got a really strong mutual aid group for the Wotton area, and that has really identified people's different skills. There are a huge range of skills across the whole community, and people have really contributed what they can. There's been a huge amount of support for people in need, for vulnerable people, older people in particular. And I think one thing I've also thought about is how we're valuing who's important, as you mentioned, just seeing nice rainbow designs on wheelie bins to thank the guys collecting the bin. So it's been fantastic to see that as well. And from the district council perspective, we quite often engage with parishes and towns and structures of governance. And I think it'd be great if as a result of this crisis, we can start to engage more with communities, with community groups, with individuals, with people who have different roles within their community. Not quite sure how we do that, but all suggestions are welcome. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to bring us to our final round with the panel. There have been a ton of good questions. I apologise to people whose questions I've not brought in. But Chris Miller's posted some really useful stuff, which I'm going to try and summarise into a wrap-up question. I told the panel in advance to come with kind of what's their one thing that they do to build back better. But to bring in Chris's question as well, who are the agents of change in this situation? Is this something about individual action? Are businesses the leaders? Who are the other leaders in our political system or social movements? So 60 seconds each, that tough end of the panel question, to say what's the action you think is needed and who's best placed to be taking and leading that action. I'll let you choose who goes first. We'll leave an awkward silence till someone comes in.
Okay, I'll go first. I'll just say that I think it really is on the street. It's the local individuals. They didn't wait around for the government to take action. So the agents of change, it's us, it's the residents, it's the citizens. But we need to find some ways to engage and to feed that information upwards. I think we can build back better if we do it together. Thanks.
Philip's agreeing with that. Well, I'm going to say that politics really matters. I think we're seeing that because of the government people elected and what a different situation we'd be in if we had a different government. And do you want my question to the answer to the question, what was the one thing you would do?
Yeah, what's the one thing you do?
Okay, I'll say that as well. I think all of this would have worked so much better if more of it be run through local authorities. I think it's a really good time for local authorities and local development organisations and the local generally to ask for more power and money, because a lot of what's failing about our response to COVID is because they're creating sort of parallel, privatised, centralised structures. And every time they do that, it doesn't work. Whereas Stroud District Council or GFirstLEP or Gloucestershire County Council could have done a much better job because they know what happens here. So we need much strengthened, I think, and much better funded local political structures. But what was the most important thing we should do? We should put a climate brake on all investment. So unless it meets the conditions for net zero carbon by 2030, but I might have to negotiate that, then it can't have any public money.
You come to you next.
Okay. Yes, well, the over-centralisation, I mean, I often say that China and Britain have a lot in common, because they're both two of the most centralised countries in the world, apart from the absolute dictatorships in the Middle East and so on. So decentralisation to local authorities is critical. And thinking about the planning of transport, of land use, of business, of location of different facilities of housing and so on, which is currently, I have to say, in this area, pretty well disastrous from the point of view of climate change and from the point of view of health. Despite all the good words, all the fond sayings, we're actually deciding things which are counterproductive. And one of the reasons is that there's no control at the local level. Local authorities need control over land, and as they do in some places overseas in Europe. So land governance is the issue that I would say is absolutely central to a healthy and sustainable society. Currently, it's all wrong.
David?
So who are the agents of change? That has to be all of us, and I think we've demonstrated that over the last 8 to 10 weeks. And I think part of the demonstration is some of the frustration we've seen of the last where are we now? It's Wednesday, isn't it? Of the last sort of 4 or 5 days. You know, that outbreak of outrage about the actions of one person from huge numbers of people in right across all communities and across the political spectrum. So I think the agents of change has to be all of us. I would completely agree that at a local level, we are much better placed to rebuild and change our economy than we are in doing it in a top-down model from Westminster or Whitehall. And my biggest frustration of the last sort of 10 or 11 years in this role is is the naivety of some of the decisions that are made in London, because they're made with a London framework in place. So the misunderstanding of how, yes, of course, why would you ever need to own a car if you lived in central London? Because it's got a really, really good public transport system that operates pretty much 24/7. But if you're in the Stroud Valleys, then getting around the Stroud Valleys without a car is really difficult. Not impossible, but really difficult. So the more local decision making, the more local power that we can get, and the devolution white paper, when that comes out later in the year, hopefully we'll see a shift to that. I don't know. We'll have to wait and see what that says.
Well, thank you all to all our panel for lots of thoughts and food for thought this evening. I've put in the chat again the link to the survey. That Stroud Building Back Better survey is still live, and we really do want to share that and get thoughts. This has been hosted by Stroud District Green Party. We work a lot on the policy to take these things forward, so do, if you're not already a member or want to get more involved in the policy making and action and campaigning, whether with us or with others, please do get involved in that. And I think